into two of the buildings. Okay, so I'm Tamara Greenfield. I'm the executive director of Fourth Arts Block. And Fourth Arts Block is a coalition of arts and community organizations that was founded in 2001 to advocate for the preservation of the facilities here that were being used by arts groups, and then in 2003 incorporated as a nonprofit organization. In the late 50s, early 60s, the city had an urban renewal plan for the area, which was going to result in the demolition of all of this area. And they were going to build kind of a Stuyvesant Town giant super block housing structure. So Cooper Square Committee was actually founded to fight that plan. But part of it, they were using eminent domain, and they did use eminent domain in parts of this section to clear the buildings and so that they would be ready to be torn down. Luckily, Cooper Square Committee was successful at fighting the plan, plus the city had an economic downturn that hopefully we won't repeat as it was, and they had to get rid of the plan, and suddenly the city owned a lot of property and it was empty, and a lot of that property had been used traditionally for theaters, for social halls, for non-residential uses, and so they were empty, and arts groups moved in because it's an empty former theater, an empty factory, an empty whatever. So basically, starting in the early 70s, La Mama got a month-to-month lease on one of the buildings and kind of started doing their investment and work here, and a lot of other small arts groups just started moving in and homesteading, and they had month-to-month leases for 30 years here, which meant that, well, no one was really bugging them. They could do what they wanted. They also couldn't really get any kind of money to do investment. They couldn't get a loan. They couldn't, so everything had to be out of pocket, out of exchange, barter, whatever. And then in about the late 90s, the city started looking at their city-owned property and thinking, maybe we don't want to own all this property anymore. Maybe we can have a better use for it. And in some places that resulted in some pretty controversial decisions about things like community gardens and other facilities that actually did just get sold off to private developers. And then in this instance, FAB was formed to start to have that negotiation with the city to say, let's come up with a different plan for this area. And each of the buildings was had to go through a city process. It was deed protected for nonprofit cultural use in perpetuity. So none of these buildings could be flipped, sold off to a private developer. They are in now like the stock of arts facilities forever, unless somebody wants to go through a really long process and a lot of political wrangling to undo it. This was also established by Mayor Bloomberg as a cultural district, this block, and it's the first cultural district in Manhattan, and currently still the only cultural district in Manhattan official. There's plenty of other, cultural district areas, but it's like this and BAM are the two official city designated cultural districts. When the properties were transferred, you can probably imagine that they weren't in great condition. The city had done kind of minimal maintenance on the buildings. The arts groups had done what they could do, and at the time of the transfer, a few million were put out to kind of do some immediate things. Pretty quickly that became clear that was not going to do the trick, and we had groups that are homeless trying to get into facilities or vacant properties that aren't habitable, that are up to code or whatever. So in the last few years we've been doing a lot of advocacy, and we have now raised about $16 million from the city to renovate the building. So what you're seeing is a lot of the kind of before, in a way. I mean, you're going to see a lot of the history, but also like the before of what these buildings will look like when they're fully renovated and all of the capacity is realized. Another really cool thing about the Cultural District Plan part of it is that there were 8 properties transferred, 2 are empty lots and 2 are vacant. So we actually got a net gain of property from what the cultural groups actually had to begin with. So we've actually increased the amount of space that we have available, and it's within the next, what we're estimating is within the next 2 to 3 years we'll have 40,000 square feet of new cultural space, or fully usable cultural space, and within the next 10 years we could be doubling the cultural space on 4th Street that was originally here. So it's a pretty amazing opportunity.
We have 4 buildings that had existing arts groups in. That's important because this is not like a top-down thing. The groups were already here and going. You have 2 abandoned buildings that are being renovated for cultural use, and 2 empty lots fronting on 3rd Street, which will be developed later. So, but it's a great gift to the, and I don't know if you said the contract, the agreement stipulates that they must stay as cultural uses forever.
So the other thing that's really, I mean, part of what we'll be sharing is about the history of the block is this set of properties has had this really extraordinary history of being kind of a home for marginalized populations, and eventually those populations may not be as marginalized over time, but when they first started it was a lot of immigrant groups who had they weren't accepted other places. They were here creating their own social spaces, their own organizing spaces. This was a hotbed of union and socialist organizing. This became a place, a very active gay subculture, drag area. Andy Warhol's, factory had there's a gay film theater here that he was showing his stuff. And a lot of and then experimental theater off Broadway really took off here, mostly starting from Mama and then just kind of spiraling out, which really was giving an opportunity for people who didn't have a voice in mainstream theater, an opportunity and film, a chance to be able to have their pieces produced, to experiment, to try things, and then so many of those people have gone on to have really influential role in all the realms of art. So part of what we're really looking at is that these kinds of spaces are essential to what makes New York a cultural center. You have to have these places that create an opportunity for people to experiment and connect and see each other, and then start to partner with somebody else, and kind of an incubator of ideas and relationships, and those are being lost, particularly in Manhattan, but it's spreading all over. And theater, space for the arts is one of the biggest challenges right now. If you talk to any advocacy group, they're just fighting to try to keep groups in areas that they've been in for a really long time. So this is kind of like the counter story, and we're really happy to be part of the counter story. And also because we will be expanding space, there'll be a lot more opportunities.